it come up in a second. And good evening, everyone. We have a few followers already in here. It's nice to see. Jeff is back. I'm back. I'm currently in Chongqing. I have to think about this. I left Xi'an this morning on a train, and I'm in Chongqing now.
For the benefit of our viewers who don't know anything about Chinese geography, where exactly are those places, Jerry?
Chongqing is actually it's quite famous. It's not that far from Wuhan. It's just up the river. It's on the Yangtze River. It's the not far from where the dam is. It's inland of the dam, and Xi'an is pretty much central China. In terms of its north and southness, Xi'an is right in the middle. Mm-hmm. It's a fair way inland, but in terms of its westness, it's not very far west. But it is considered the gateway to the northwest. And one of the things we're going to talk about tonight, it was the location of the Central Asian Summit just a few days ago, and I happened to be. I've got a personal story to tell about that. I was in Xi'an at the same time as Xi Jinping and the leaders of 5 countries plus Xi Jinping, and we'll talk about that. And good morning, Seymour Fact from Seoul. We're going to hi Tube for MJ. We're going to make this a relatively fast one. I left my hotel at 6 o'clock. I'm just trying to find I'll get rid of that light. There you go. That light that's behind my head, and stop the now. I have a halo glow. And the first thing I wanted to talk about tonight was, Jeff, you've been banned from YouTube. What happened?
Yeah, interesting story. Well, is there a way for me to share my screen on this, because I can just show?
I think I don't know. I think you might need to be the host, but have a look. Give it a try.
Okay. All right. Well, let me just find what I posted about it. Saturday, I believe it was, I posted a video on my YouTube channel, The Bitter Pill, which, by the way, everyone should go subscribe to my channel and like videos and watch them and stuff. Concerning an interview by the Breaking Points podcast, which is hosted by Crystal Ball, yes, that's her real name, and Sagar and Jetty, with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who last month announced his candidacy for president in the Democratic Party. And for those who don't know, the Kennedy family is a very famous political family. Lots of men in the family have served in political office, and including, of course, John F. Kennedy, the president in the early 60s. And so, like others from his family, Kennedy's known for his liberal views, and he's a prominent environmental lawyer and activist. And he's also a staunch opponent of the Ukraine war, good for him, and supporter of pardoning Julian Assange. But he's also a longtime anti-vax activist, which, if you don't know anything about the politics of the United States, that definitely doesn't play very well with Democratic voters, which that's the primary he's running in, including Crystal Ball. Her co-host Sagar, who's more conservative, is also pro-vax, though. So they do this interview, about a 50-minute interview, where they talked about all sorts of different topics, including the ones I just mentioned, as well as about a 9-minute segment on Kennedy's views on the vaccines. And so, after having a calm discussion for the rest of the interview, things heated up considerably when the topic of vaccines was raised, and Crystal, who mainly conducted that segment of the interview, and RFK were kind of going back and forth, interrupting each other. What really struck me and led me to do a video on the interview was the outraged reaction a lot of YouTube podcasters and their followers had to that portion of the interview, because if folks don't know anything about the situation with the political left in the United States, as opposed to the Democratic Party, which is more sort of traditional liberal among the voters, there are a lot of people on the far left in the United States who are anti-vaxxers like Kennedy is, or at least they were opposed to the vaccine mandates. They were opposed to mask mandates. They were opposed to lockdowns, etc. All of which are views that Kennedy shares, and also tend, as Kennedy does, to be lab-leak conspiracy theorists. But anyway, so they were just outraged that Crystal was interrupting and interjecting her views so much, as if that isn't something that is, permissible when you do an interview with somebody, is to interject your own point of view. But anyway, in the course of reacting in detail to the content of that interview and one of the videos that was made about it, attacking Crystal for her criticisms of Kennedy, I backed Crystal up in her criticisms of RFK Jr.'s claims. He's continuing to claim years and years after the idea was debunked that some childhood vaccines were linked to autism. And, his claim that COVID vaccines don't work even for reducing severe illness and death. So I backed Crystal up in criticizing those views of his and cited some additional arguments and research countering his claims. But even though, like Crystal, I was arguing against his claims that and by the way, YouTube, I'm saying I support vaccines. I think they work, especially in reducing severe illness and death. So I'm criticizing RFK Jr.'s claims. So don't censor us, please, YouTube. So even though I was, arguing against RFK Jr.'s claims, YouTube took down my video claiming that I had violated its medical misinformation policy by countering misinformation. And thus far, I appealed immediately, and they rejected it in about half an hour, even though the video itself is over an hour long. So I've, appealed again. Seems like people have better luck in appealing these things if they reach out to Team YouTube on Twitter. I would suggest to anyone listening to this that you go look at a pinned tweet on my Twitter page and back me up in appealing to Twitter. And I've got on there, a lengthy description of what I said and why it was not contrary to their medical misinformation policy. So
have you received in the past any kind of warning that you are likely to be suspended in the future if you continue with some behavior?
If I what?
Have you ever received a warning that if you continue with some behavior that you're likely to be suspended? Or was this just a snap decision by the AI or the algorithm, whatever it is?
Yeah, I did receive a warning when I similarly was debunking vaccine misinformation that Joe Rogan had put forth. And same deal, they said I was violating their policy, supposedly making claims about COVID vaccines that contradict expert consensus from the World Health Organization, etc. Okay. But in fact, I was supporting those claims and, arguing against Joe Rogan. So yes, I have had a warning before. And in that case, my initial appeal wasn't successful and I just kind of gave up. But, I'm trying to get it overturned for real this time.
In China, you get blocked as well if I, for example, were to go on the public forum of WeChat or any of these channels that I can do social media on, if I start talking about the law, talking about medicine, I will be suspended because I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a doctor, I'm not qualified to do so.
Yeah.
We suspend you when you're in China.
Yeah. Well, the way it ought to work is they should only do that if you actually say things that violate what the scientific consensus is.
I think the thing is, if you're making commentary, if you are a social media influencer, right? I don't claim that title, but there are people here with 2, 3, 4 million followers, 10 million followers, because you can get that on things like the Chinese version of TikTok. You can find people with hundreds of thousands and millions of followers if they say something, even if they're supporting, they're not allowed to say something about a topic they don't know. They could tweet, for example. I mean, it's not called a retweet, but they could like and share something that an expert does say, but they're not allowed to comment on that expert's opinion themselves. So they can like and share, but they say, "I agree with this," because well, that's one of the Chinese things that people count as a little bit repressive, but it makes sense. It's false information. Well, do, but they get blocked. They get banned. Yeah, I've got a problem. I'm in a hotel. I've got the best Wi-Fi. I've turned everything else off, and apparently I have a little problem here. So we might make this a short one tonight. I was going to ask you what happened in Bakhmut, because you're something of a well-read. I'm not going to say you're an expert. You're well-read on the Ukraine conflict. So what's happened in Ukraine this week? Because there's Belgorod, there's another city that's under siege as well, and Bakhmut. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, as your viewers may be aware, there's been a battle for the city of Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine, in the Donbass region for about a year now. And the reason why it took so long, and the reason why it was deemed an important battleground, was that the Ukrainian military had kind of made that their fortress, like the best fortified place in the world, and it was the linchpin of their occupation of the part of the Donbass region that they occupied. So, and then Russia kind of set a trap for Ukraine, and that they knew that this was important to them to hold on to the city. So, they just kept, slowly grinding them down. They didn't, they have lost a fair number of men there themselves, but they, have been very careful to just, utilize their strengths in terms of artillery to constantly, attack the Ukrainian positions and ground them down over time. So I think the estimate is that just in the Bakhmut area alone, Ukraine has lost something like 100,000 troops. So
I heard that Russia lost 100,000 troops. Which one of these is information? Which one is misinformation?
Well, I'll give you a hint. The estimates of 100,000 Russian troops came from the U.S. and other Western sources. So draw your own conclusion from that.
Thank you. Yes.
So it's about over in Bakhmut. They've captured all but a tiny fraction of it, I guess, and we'll soon take the rest. And
it's a supply route too. It's a very important supply route, isn't it?
Yeah, and so now that Bakhmut has basically fallen, I think we'll see the conflict progress, and also that Ukraine has lost so many troops and so much equipment that the conflict will progress more rapidly from now on, and hopefully mostly be wound down by early fall.
But they're also talking about. I mean, you're talking about winding this down by what I call autumn, you call fall. But then isn't there already the issue of the F-16s, which are going to take at least 9 months to prepare, train, and get operational? So we're not talking about the end of this year. We're talking about the beginning of next year. And then, of course, you can't have a winter offensive because it's just too winter. And then you're talking about it winding down, but other people are talking about it extending into next year now.
Yeah, well, I mean, so basically, Scott Ritter and other experts are saying that for all intents and purposes, it will be over by fall. That meaning Ukraine's ability to inflict damage on the Russian military will. Russia lost a lot of troops there too, but not nearly as many as Ukraine. Responding to a comment there. But Russia already had overwhelming military superiority, and they've been systematically destroying Ukraine's weaponry. They've blown up. They blew up recently a warehouse where uranium-tipped artillery shells had been located that Ukraine had gotten from the UK. Which, if folks don't know, those artillery shells, which are used because they penetrate armor very well, they're not used by Russia because they're very, very damaging to the environment.
I
Iraq has
believe that's caused a uranium cloud to go across the North Sea, and it looks like it's going to rain down on the UK. Would that be karma? That would be karma.
Well, it was either that or have them using them on the battlefield, which would have resulted in much worse contamination. So they had a tough choice there. Blow them up in the warehouse before they could use them, or have them, firing them at them on the battlefield, not only causing more harm to the Russian troops, but also contaminating a wider area of the environment very severely. Because, as folks probably know, it's wreaked havoc on the regions in Iraq where it was located, just amazingly high rates of birth defects and cancers and so forth.
And this is a fact. China currently has its diplomat in the region, and I'm very sorry I can't remember his name. He's recently gone over to the region now, and he's starting his diplomatic process with the United Nations, with the Russians, with the Ukrainians, with NATO. And I think as long as China is trying to do something, we're going to continue to get the West trying to say China aren't doing something. It is a very sad situation.
Yeah, it's horrible, and I wish that Ukraine and Russia had been able to reach an agreement back a year ago, a little over a year ago, when they were close to reaching a settlement and ending the conflict. But of course, the U.S. and UK pressured the Ukrainians to back out of that, and so here we are, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian military deaths, several thousand civilian casualties, and probably at least 20,000 Russian casualties. It's just awful, and of course, Ukraine's economy and infrastructure has been destroyed. And this was all avoidable. So, it really tells you either how little Zelensky and his acolytes care about the Ukrainian people, or how much he's under the thumb of the U.S. that he can't negotiate a peace settlement even if he wanted to, or likely both, actually.
Okay, what about if I give you 3 words? Maybe I'm going to give you 3 words, and I'm going to ask for your response to these 3 words: BlackRock, Halliburton, Monsanto.
Well, I'm not sure how much. Well, I guess the Monsanto connection would be that presumably they're doing a lot of business in Ukraine, and it's escalating because Ukraine has turned into a neoliberal hellhole where any corporation that wants to can make tons of money. Of course, military situation, the weapons contractors are kind of the tail wagging the dog. They drive a lot of this perpetuation of conflicts all over the world, and the impetus to keep trying to engage in them, even though it's backfiring massively on the economies of Europe and the U.S. and not really hurting Russia's economy very much.
Russia's making a fortune selling to India, and India's making a fortune selling to Europe. I saw another really interesting figure. The sales of BMW in places like Kazakhstan have gone up by hundreds of %. So what's happening is BMW are sending cars to Kazakhstan. The Russian people who want to buy them are not able to buy them in Russia. They're just traveling across to Kazakhstan or to Uzbekistan, and it's really good for the economies of those regions because, of course, they're going to put a premium on that car. Gas is coming from all of those areas too. It's been a really interesting change around for the Central Asian economies. and India in particular. Now, I saw that Russia has stopped selling gas to India for rupees. They're flooded with rupees, and now they're saying, "Well, we don't have enough. We don't have enough to sell you. We just got too many rupees, so we're going to have to start changing this now and buying stuff from India with their excess rupees, which is a bit of a problem." The Chernobyl thing, a lot of people don't realize that Chernobyl was part of Ukraine, is part of Ukraine.
Right, yeah.
And it is a really big problem, still a big problem there. So I think a lot of people, when you hear about geopolitics and you hear about words like Chernobyl and you start to think where it is quite important in the scope of these things. When you hear about things like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and bordering onto Afghanistan, you start to think how important those places are in a different field. They're not related to the Ukraine conflict, but they're related to a different field, which is, it starts to get very geopolitical. So carry on with your assessment of, I heard that Monsanto, BlackRock, and Halliburton have pretty much taken control of every asset that Ukraine has. I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard for sure who is, but certainly Zelensky's regime has presided over the ultimate neoliberalization of the Ukrainian economy. So basically, just like when Yeltsin was in charge in Russia, it's a free for all for both native oligarchs and foreigners to get extremely rich, exploiting the Ukrainian people and Ukraine's resources. So, but to continue, I mean, you asked me about Belgorod, and basically, what happened there was that there was a attempt to, I guess, an attempted sabotage and attack on Belgorod, which is like a border region within Russia, and so they sent some troops or special op forces or something in there, and they were thinking, based on misinformation, I guess, that 95% of Russia's troops were in Ukraine or something, which is just completely false. But so of course they were met with a large contingent of Russian forces, and quickly, dozens of them were killed and they were routed. But I mean, Ukraine has consistently been trying to commit terrorist operations within Russia. Of course, they've assassinated a couple of Russian journalists, in Moscow. At least they're believed to be responsible for it. The Ukrainian government somehow, and because they were on the kill list that the Ukrainian government has, and also, of course, there have been terrorist attacks on Crimea, which has been Russian territory since 2014, including the attempted destruction of the cursed bridge that connects Crimea to the Russian mainland.
I remember that. Yeah, and that bridge is now open and operating again.
Yeah, they fixed it within a couple of weeks.
The bridge never closed. It's operating fully again.
One side of the bridge was open, kind of like how U.S. highways are during the summer when they're repairing the damage from the winter.
Okay. So we won't get into the U.S. Infrastructure problems.
It's terrible.
Somebody, Hang Tua, I think, right at the very beginning said, "Whatever happened to Build Back Better, BBB, which was the G7 2019, it might have been 2020, they came up with this thing to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative. So in order to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative, not to benefit the world, they're going to create a BBB, Build Back a Better World, so B3W. And there was also the BBB, which was in the United States. Well, the BBB got stalled because one of the Democrat Party's own members would not sign off on it. Sorry?
Joe Manchin.
Manchin,
Joe
yeah.
Manchin, he's basically a Republican in the Democratic
A
Party.
Republican with a different color suit.
Yeah.
He's got the right tie and the right badge, but he's got the wrong politics.
Yeah, I mean, not that there's much of a difference between Republicans and Democrats these days. They're just bad
is
in
hard to
somewhat
tell.
different ways.
So BBB, the three Bs, stalled and went nowhere. It can't go anywhere because it couldn't go through the Senate and Congress. B3W went nowhere because there was no allowance made for who was going to fund it, who was going to administer it, who was going to manage it. And about 1 year later, I actually did a video on, not a video, an article on this, which got published in Pearls and Irritations. Anybody who doesn't subscribe to Pearls and Irritations should do so. You can find that online, Pearls and Irritations. And it's an Australian, very, very balanced. They have some stuff in there that I don't like, but it's hard to argue with them because they're very well researched, very well balanced. I got an article in there, published in there about a year ago, which itemized everything that Joe Biden's press release said. This is part of the Build Back a Better World program. And I researched every single one of the projects and found that every single one of them had been started before. Some of them had actually stalled and never gone anywhere. But these projects had existed, but none of them were moving anywhere. And none of them were part of the new B3W. So Build Back Better completely stopped. B3W never completely started, completely never started. It just didn't get off the ground and still hasn't to this day. And I think it was 2, and it might have even been 3 G7 meetings ago when they did it. And it hasn't done anything. So anyone who's in Africa, Central, South America, Asia, Central Asia, who's looking for help from the United States is only going to get it after China has gone in and said, we'll help you. Then the United States will come in and say, we'll help you more. And then, of course, the conditions against that help, what the United States have done, and it is proven now, is they have created debt traps for those third world and developing countries. So, yeah, there's the word debt trap, and here it is. It came up. B3W. B3W Honglong is not a debt trap because it doesn't exist. It does nothing. IMF and the World Bank, yes, they are debt traps. But B3W has never, ever, as far as I'm aware, started a single project. It has some projects allocated to it, but they're not B3W. They were projects that were going on before they announced B3W. And now they can say, oh, look, we've got this happening and this happening under B3W. So B3W can't be a debt trap because it actually doesn't provide anything. But the IMF, World Bank, yeah, they're debt traps.
Yeah.
Oh, this is. I'm going to put this one up. What a disappointment Stan Grant is. I bet you have no idea who Stan Grant is, Jeff, do you?
No, I don't.
Okay. Stan Grant is an Aboriginal Australian or native-born Australian, native Australian, First Nations, and he is probably their most senior foreign correspondent journalist. He's lived in China, worked in China, extremely anti-China, and he's also extremely anti the royalty, the monarchy. And of course, Australia is a Commonwealth country that still has the King of England is the king. And
which network does he work for?
He works for the ABC, but he's also working for ASPI. He's a senior fellow of ASPI, but he's just stood down. And he says it's racism. Now, I have no doubt whatsoever he gets racist taunts. He'll get racist insults because he is First Nation. No doubt he gets them. But he was absolutely insulting towards the monarchy. And of course, a lot of people agree with that. I used to be a monarchist. I'm not anymore. And I have my reasons for changing. And I've actually made a video about that a long time ago. But yeah, so Shady Hazard says, he is a token, but he's actually not. He's a very intelligent man. He's just chosen to channel and funnel his energies into being pretty much anti everything. He has nothing positive to say. He kicked somebody out of a question and answer live TV show and he kicked someone out for asking for saying that he supported Russia. He was a Russian. Australia is full of people from different ethnicities, and this guy was from a Russian background. And he said, "Well, you've never considered what happened, and I'm supporting Russia because of this." And he said, "Well, I'd like you to leave. I'd like you to leave." He got kicked out, called security on him. So
Wow.
we're not allowed. You're not allowed an alternate opinion. Now he's just stood down because he says he's just received too much racism. And this is true. Whoop, not that one. This one. He's so anti-China, it is enough to make you puke. And yes, he is so anti-China. He writes for ASPI. He is a senior fellow of ASPI. And ASPI are the anti-China weapons manufacturer funded think tank that creates things like AUKUS. They're selling weapons to Australia. And he works for them. And he's a senior journalist.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure this is true elsewhere in the West as well, but here in the U.S., we have a lot of leftists, socialists, who are also very anti-China and very, very misinformed. I think I've mentioned that before, but it's pretty disappointing how basically just anything people hear a lot from people they know, they just believe it, without really looking into it.
It's a bit of a problem, and I see this all the time on Twitter, where someone will make a comment to me, and I'll say, well, that's wrong. And then they'll quote or cite a media article that tells it and say, look, it's in the papers. But do you actually believe what you see in the papers? Well, I believe this because it's in the papers. And the problem about China is that it's in every paper. It's in every, there's no middle ground on China. China is evil. China is aggressive. China is everything negative is China. And of course,
China's to blame for the pandemic.
Yeah.
I was just arguing with somebody on Twitter yesterday who's like, oh, well, it's absolutely clear that that COVID came from the Wuhan lab, and I'm like, how is that clear? There's not been
because
any
Marco Rubio said so.
Yeah, or a lot of people on the left here in the United States, also subscribe to it, and they'll say things, well, like, look, Jeffrey Sachs, chair of the whatever commission with the Lancet, says he thinks it was a lab leak. And who is Jeffrey Sachs? He is an economist. He's not a virologist.
But he is from the Lancet. Now he says it. He says he thinks it's a lab leak, but he doesn't say he thinks it's a Chinese lab leak.
But a lot of people think that it is a Chinese lab leak. This guy that I was arguing with thinks it was a leak from the Wuhan lab, and he claims that somehow infected people from the lab went over to the Hunan market, which is 10 miles away from the lab, and got it going there. And it's like, okay, so how were there no outbreaks anywhere else in Wuhan at that time except in the vicinity of the market or among visitors or employees of the market? That doesn't make any damn sense. So anyway, he said something to the effect of, well, I'm right about this, just like I'm right about everything else about COVID. And I said, so boy, you're sure arrogant, or something to that effect. And he blocked me at that point.
Oh dear. Yeah. I find that I tend not to argue with people. If they're going to be stupid, I'll just block them. But I tend to get involved in discussions with people, and occasionally they'll block me. And most of the time, the people who block me are academics. And I think it's because they just don't want my comments on their timeline, because my comments are always supported. I can support my comments. When I say, but there is no concentration camp in Xinjiang, I've been there.
Yeah.
And the people who are saying there are haven't been there.
Exactly.
So there's a difference there. When someone who has been there and traveled extensively can tell you, when someone who's been to Hong Kong and understands the nature of Hong Kong can tell you what's happening, and they tell you with authority and they support that, then of course nobody wants that on their timeline. So it's best just to block that person off your timeline. I think that's what people are doing.
Yeah, someone says in the comments, anyone saying there's evidence, quote unquote, about a Wuhan Institute of Virology leak is going off reports from U.S. three-letter agencies. And that's very true. But, unfortunately, the idea that it leaked from a lab somewhere, mostly that it leaked from the WIV lab is the majority opinion in the U.S. now. Just like, 20 years ago, the opinion was the majority opinion, by far the majority opinion was that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. And turns out that one of the main people pushing this lab leak conspiracy theory, Michael Gordon, is a writer for the Wall Street Journal now. Back in 2002, he was a writer for the New York Times and published the most widely shared article saying that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. So,
yeah. And isn't it funny how anybody who comes out contrary to the narrative has something wrong with them?
You're like if you say the vaccines worked pretty well, then it's like, oh, you're in cahoots with big pharma. And I'm like, well, there's lots of countries that have like China and Cuba that have manufactured COVID vaccines that, it's not big pharma, calling all the shots. And, there's research from all over the world showing that the vaccines work. Hey, YouTube, I'm saying that the vaccines work.
I've taken 3 vaccines. I've taken 2 vaccines and a booster, and I got COVID in December last year. I'm now I'm traveling a lot at the moment, and I'm wearing a mask while I travel for good self-protection reasons, and partially because here's the thing in China: there's a lot, particularly when you're on public transport. And I've been catching trains most of the time. I was 5 hours on a train this morning. And when you're on a train, you get a lot of older people, particularly these are uneducated or less educated people. And they tend to view foreigners with a bit of suspicion. Has he got COVID because he's a foreigner? You can see this thought process going on. And so I put the mask on as a mark of kind of respect to them, because they don't know that I'm okay. I've been in China as long as they have. I've had as many vaccines, possibly more than them. I've had my COVID back in December, but it is resurging here in China right now. And by resurging, I mean in December last year, about 80% of the population got COVID in the space of 3 weeks. 80%. And that's now, I read just recently, they say it was 85%, but every single person that I know. And then I found, there's one person that I didn't get it. Someone I know didn't get it. One of those was Fernando, who's currently traveling around Xinjiang. Guess what? Fernando just came down with COVID a couple of days ago. And that's happening right now. Another friend of mine from Guangzhou was in Xi'an. I was going to catch up with him last weekend. And he's come down with COVID, so he went back to Guangzhou. So it is back. A lecture I was supposed to do in Guangzhou on Sunday of this week has been canceled because 3 or 4 of the people presenting have got COVID, and they wanted to go online. They wanted to go online instead of having it it's a seminar, a 2-day seminar in a hotel, and I was supposed to be presenting, but they've canceled it.
Oh, well, somebody in the comments said they claim that it was a lab leak, but it leaked from Fort Detrick, which is in Maryland in the United States. And my response to that is, how come there were no documented cases in the state of Maryland until March of 2020, when the initial outbreak took place in Wuhan? Starting in December. I mean, that doesn't make sense. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm not going to say that Seymour Factor is wrong here. I'm not going to say he's right, because we just don't know. But there was that vaping illness, which was a mystery illness, and it was in that region. And here's the funny thing. This is the strangest thing to me. Why aren't America investigating that? Why haven't they investigated it and put out the findings of it? And there may be a reason for that. And it may not be related to COVID. I'm personally of the opinion that the science will tell us eventually. Whether that'll be in 100 years' time or whether it'll be next month, I don't know. But whenever it happens,
15 for them to firmly pin down how SARS began, or to actually document.
And that's what I mean. It may be years before we know, but then when it does happen, as soon as it's identified, this is the most likely cause. Anybody who doesn't want it to be that cause is going to say, "Oh, yeah, you would say that, wouldn't you?" And no one's going to believe it anyway. So let's just leave it to history.
To convince people once they've made up their mind. Yeah.
Oh, there's a little comment on Stan Grant here. He left his wife for Tracy Holmes, and then they went off to live in Hong Kong and China. That's the last we'll mention about Stan Grant for now. I'm trying to scroll down.
Another comment I want to respond to. HG says, sad part is COVID was unlikely to kill versus those experimental jabs. Well, first of all, COVID is, officially it's killed like 7 million people, but it's estimated to have killed upwards of 20 million people in the past 3 years. That's a lot of people. Excess death rates are through the roof because in addition to the acute illness with COVID, it jacks up your likelihood of having a heart attack or a stroke, and causes long COVID. And I don't know, estimates vary, but roughly 10% of the time, which a portion of the people who get it still haven't gotten over it, and it's very debilitating. I don't think that there's any comparison between the possibility as exists with many medications of severe side effects, which is pretty slim with the COVID vaccines, regardless of what type they are, versus the possibility of harm coming from COVID. And I mean, only about 1% of people who get polio who are not vaccinated wind up being paralyzed from it. Usually their cases are asymptomatic if they get infected. And the polio vaccine really doesn't do much to prevent you from getting infected with the polio virus, but it virtually eliminates the possibility of you getting paralytic polio if you've had like 3 doses or whatever.
I read an interesting report about a year ago that there's more wild polio. There's no wild polio in the world now. All the polio that happens is reactions to vaccines that have gone wrong. So effectively, when you get polio from a vaccine,
it's like a 1 in a million chance of getting that sort of reaction from the vaccine, which I think it's only one of them that does that, versus 1 in 100 if you get infected and you're not vaccinated.
Correct. Yeah. So it's a tiny, but the fact is there's more vaccine-related polio than wild virus-related polio in the world now. So maybe it's time to stop using those vaccines for that particular thing. If we've got over it, I don't know.
Well, I mean, I forget which one it is. I think it's the injected one that doesn't cause polio symptoms.
Right. So I got one when I was a kid on a lump of sugar. That was polio.
Yeah, or oral polio. Yeah.
And in my school,
new studies show that diabetes in children is now twice as likely if you've had COVID. Yeah, it shoots up the rates of diabetes too. So, COVID is not a good thing to have. Even if you're vaccinated, there's still, some chance of, long-term effects that, it's unfortunately not rare. Even if you've been vaccinated. Short term, you're very protected from severe illness and death with the COVID vaccines. And, again, regardless of what type, whether it's mRNA or the more traditional platform that China and Cuba used, and that some American vaccines used, it doesn't matter. They all protect really well against severe illness, even though it's documented by that mass infection that happened in China, they aren't very good anymore at preventing infection. They do help, but if you have something as contagious as Omicron is, they're just reducing it relative to the people who are unvaccinated. But if you're exposed to it enough, there's a good chance you'll get it, even if
I
you're
think this comment from Kevin is aimed at you, not me. Nice to hear from an anti-neoliberalist and anti-imperial. This is you, definitely, and not brought into the anti-vax nutcase. It's like,
it's very unfortunate.
I think that's you. Kevin and I have a lot of communications off this channel, and he's a smart guy.
It's unfortunately, it's very common in the American left-leaning YouTube community for people to have this anti-vax, anti-mask, anti-lockdown, believe 100% of the lab leak, because unfortunately, most Americans don't really understand science, and so even people who are more critically thinking about political topics, they buy into whatever they hear a lot when it comes to scientific matters. So a number of years ago, there were a lot of left-leaning people who bought into the idea that the World Trade Centers were brought down by a controlled demolition.
You mean they weren't?
There was no evidence that happened. If you looked at the pattern of damage, lots of buildings were damaged in the area in just sort of a haphazard manner that couldn't have happened via a controlled demolition, an inside job or whatever.
So before we move off vaccines and COVIDs and things like that, I wanted to comment on this one because this tube 4MJ is in Australia, I think, I'm pretty sure. And I grew up in the UK. And in the UK, we had a lot of kids with polio when I was young. Several kids in my school had to wear the leg braces, like Forrest Gump had, those kinds of things. And it was quite common when I was young to see people like that. And when I got a little older, when I was about 13 or 14, one of my teachers was disabled. And then I came to China and hardly saw any disabled people at all. It was really interesting because they were very well hidden, and that was the issue. It wasn't that there weren't any here. They were well hidden. Anyway, let's move on from that. Did you hear about what happened in Xi'an, the city I was in this weekend? Obviously, someone forgot to mention to Xi Jinping that I was in Xi'an because he didn't call me up for a drink. But we were in the same city on the same day. Do you know what he was there for? Do you know about this in America?
I haven't really kept up with news from China very much lately.
Okay, so this is not actually just Chinese news. This is Central Asian Republic news. There were 5 countries, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Turkmenistan met with China. So 5 stands and 1 China met in the city I was in until 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock this morning. And they all met to discuss the region's trade. 2 of them are members of the Eurasian Economic Union. 2 of them border Iran. All of them are former Soviet republics.
Right.
And 3 of them border China. 2 of them border Afghanistan and Pakistan. We're talking about a very, very sensitive region here. And guess what they've got? So far, they've got lots of poverty. But underneath the ground, there is lots of gold, uranium, gas, and oil.
Right.
And they are all on the Belt and Road. They are all able to service Russia with free trade agreements. They're all able to work with Iran, which has a free trade agreement with the Eurasian Economic Union, of which 2 of these were members and 1 is an observer member. So not a full member, but it means they trade freely between each other. And Iran has a free trade agreement with them. I would say that what we're witnessing here, and it's going to be every 2 years they will meet, Next year, I think we'll see Afghanistan and Pakistan meeting with them, and perhaps even Iran, but perhaps Iran will stay out. Depends on what happens in the next couple of years, but Iran might stay out for 4 years before they come into this group. We're seeing a realignment of the resource-rich but infrastructure-poor countries all realigning to work with China rather than Russia. That doesn't mean they have enmity with Russia. They don't, but they're going to work with both. So we're not seeing unipolarity in this region. We're seeing multipolarity. And I would say it's probably the most important thing that's ever happened for those 5 countries, not for China. China's had many important things, but for those 5 countries in that region, that's probably the most important thing that's happened, certainly in a few hundred years. They are all former Silk Route trading partners of China, and now they're all BRA members with a security arrangement and trading arrangements with China.
Yeah.
But you didn't get to hear about that in Western news.
No. But yeah, I mean, same thing with the Middle Eastern countries, and with well, really, I mean, the whole world is benefiting from China's actions to settle conflicts and create win-win economic arrangements. And I don't know if you and I will live long enough to see it, but I think that one day we will. Assuming that the world doesn't collapse from climate change, we'll see a lot of these countries currently mired in poverty, moving out of that, which would be very good.
Well, why are they mired in poverty? They're mired in poverty because
of imperialism.
Because the G7 and the G20 have done nothing to help them. Now that's starting to change. That's the problem. So go Central Asia. That's the way I'm viewing this. I can't wait to go. There's one other aspect which is not really talked about very much. They all have arable land except Turkmenistan, which is 70% desert, but it has most of the oil and gas under that desert. So Turkmenistan is like Saudi Arabia 100 years ago. They know it's there, but they haven't got it all out yet. That's an interesting story there. The SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, this is a really interesting one as well, because Kazakhstan was the chair of the SCO in 2013, and that's when Xi Jinping made the announcement for the Belt and Road Initiative, which he called One Belt, One Road, Dai Lu, One Belt, One Road. And it's still called One Belt, One Road in China, but it's BRI outside of China. And that is really, really interesting as far as I'm concerned, what's going on. What is point 12? They're known in geopolitics as the Stan, being well, Stan actually means country in that Arabic language, or the Arabic scripts that they use. So that's why they're called the Stans.
Okay, that's why they're all called Stans.
It just means country. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, how come like Syria or Saudi Arabia aren't called Stans?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm not a linguist. If you think about what Russia did, many of these are Russian influenced from the period of the Soviet Union. They had that at that time when the Soviet Union it was the Soviet Union that gave Xinjiang the name of East Turkestan. And that's still causing problems today because East Turkestan has never existed as a country. But they knew that at that stage, Mongolia, Inner Mongolia, parts of Harbin and Heilongjiang, not Harbin, parts of Heilongjiang, the province of northeast China, were all being kind of tugged between China and Russia. And China said, well, we're going to call this place East Turkestan, and we'll take it over, and we'll give it we'll give it autonomy, but it'll be part of the Soviet Union. And they did the same with Mongolia and a couple of other things. But this Xinjiang didn't have a Stan name. They couldn't call it Xinjiang because that's Chinese. It means new border or new territory. So they couldn't leave it with that name. And I think that's the reason why Russia gave it a name. They were hoping at some stage in the future to take it over. it was a few cities in the wilderness, basically 3 oases. If we're going back 100 years, there wasn't much there. Now it's an incredible place. And the last thing is, Stan is in Arabic. It's a local regional diet. That's the reason why it's a local regional thing. I think it's Turkic.
Okay.
Maybe it's Turkic.
Oh, okay.
And Turkic doesn't necessarily mean it's from Turkey.
Right.
So the other thing about this area is it's the most beautifully diverse area. It's got snowy mountains, so you can go skiing. It's got deserts, and it's got lakes, saltwater sea, inland seas. It's got all these fantastic. It goes all the way to the Caspian Sea. It really is a fantastic environment. And what will happen when China says, we're going to do business with you and we're going to open free trade ports and we're going to do the thousands, hundreds of thousands of Chinese tourists will go there to have a look. That's what happens.
Yeah.
One of my very good friends from Zhongshan is currently in Kazakhstan having a look.
Uh-huh.
That's what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. So did you happen to hear about basically the execution that took place in the New York City subway recently?
Yeah, we talked about this briefly last week through emails, didn't we? Execution's probably not the right word, is it?
Well, I mean, I don't know how you can go through, martial arts training in the military where they teach you the chokehold and also teach you don't ever do this. There's a good chance you could kill somebody. And so the guy goes and does it to somebody, and he knows all kinds of other ways to restrain people that aren't likely to kill them. But he does that.
Yeah. I would not call that an execution. I would call that a murder. But he wasn't a police officer, this guy.
Oh, right.
Someone says death by police. He was ex-military, and apparently the guy who he killed had some serious mental problems.
Right.
He was homeless.
A homeless guy with some serious mental issues because, ironically, when he was a young teenager, I guess, his mom was killed by strangling. Somebody strangled her. So now, her son meets the same fate, basically.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And you got the whole bystander effect phenomenon. Most of the people on the train just sat there and watched. There were some people who said, "Hey, stop! You're really hurting that guy. You could kill him." But he ignored them and just kept doing what he was doing.
At first, the police said that they weren't going to charge him, and then they did. What was the story there?
Well, I mean, I guess there was a lot of public pressure put on them. There were lots of protests and lots of people, writing, communicating with them that, he needed to be held accountable. So, eventually he was, but, he's not being charged with murder. He's being charged with, I think it's involuntary manslaughter, maybe, I forget. But,
you have some very strange things I'm not sure how the American, because you've got first degree, second degree, third degree, and then you've got justifiable homicide. In the UK, we have murder, which means you intended to kill someone.
Yeah.
So if you don't intend to kill them, then it's not murder; it's just manslaughter.
Yeah.
So he would probably be charged with murder, reduced to manslaughter before it went to court. And in the UK, you don't have the plea bargaining type thing, although technically it doesn't exist legally. I'm sure it actually happens. We're going to charge your client with manslaughter. We want him to plead guilty because he did kill this guy, but we know he didn't mean to do it. And if he's going to plead not guilty, they'll charge him with murder and then say maybe the jury will say guilty. They'll charge him with both, in fact.
I don't think they're going to charge him with murder, although I think he should be. But he's intending to fight the charge and plead not guilty because he claims that the guy was a threat, which, I mean, certainly wasn't a threat to him. And, again, he had other ways he could have restrained the guy, and other people were calling the police already. So the police would have been there. They got there within a few minutes of when he started choking the guy. But by the time the police got there, it was too late because it turned, I didn't know this before, but I looked it up. A judo instructor had a nice long thread on it talking about, Like, they teach you this chokehold. They also teach you, in the military, they teach you everywhere else. They teach you, you don't do this because, not only if you do it properly, will the person you're doing it to pass out from lack of oxygen to the brain within about 10 seconds, but, within probably like a minute, it's likely they'll be dead, from the brain not getting oxygen. And he did this for several minutes, so I don't see how you can say he didn't intend it, how anybody can say he didn't intend to kill him.
Yeah. I remember the giggles in my police training academy class when we learned about mens rea and actus rea. And basically what that means is what I just said. If you had intention to kill that person, then it's murder. If you killed a person inadvertently whilst committing a crime, and then it's manslaughter. So yes.
Sorry, anonymous commenting here said impersonating Michael Jackson is a threat to white people. The guy was a Michael Jackson impersonator, and he was pretty good at it. I've watched some videos of him doing his little dance routines.
Hang on, which guy? The guy who died or the guy who killed?
The guy who died.
He was Michael Jackson impersonator.
Yeah,
that's
he did Michael Jackson dance routines while he was riding the subway.
And then what? Presumably, so he could get money.
Yeah. Because he was a homeless guy.
Yeah. So he was a let me see, popular figure in the. I wasn't aware of this. He's known for his dancing on the trains and subways, so that's how he made his living, I would guess.
Yeah.
So, what do you think's going to happen?
Well, I'm thinking probably he'll get convicted of whatever charge it is, but who knows what the sentence will be. I don't expect it will be the longest of the possible sentences. So, he might get out in a few months. Who knows?
Holly put up it was second-degree manslaughter. Now, I'm going to guess, this is just a guess and a speculation. When you kill someone whilst in the commission of a crime but don't intend to kill them, that would be first-degree manslaughter. When you kill someone just through negligence or your bad behavior, that would be second-degree manslaughter. That would kind of make sense to me. But if there's anyone knows anything about American law and can correct me on that, I'd be very happy. I do know a bit about British law, but not American law. So this is an interesting comment. Nothing's going to happen. I'd tell you what I did see a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago, a guy robbing a restaurant, and he had a gun, and he was walking out of the restaurant when he got shot several times. He got shot in the back. He went down. The guy who shot him again in the head and then left. And the police said that was okay because he just committed a robbery with a gun. And I would say, surely you can't shoot someone who's walking away from you. And
look at all the white, mass murderers, serial, people guilty of mass shootings like Dylan Roof, who murdered people in a church in South Carolina. They were taken into custody, on one after another occasion by the police with no incident. And as far as the Jordan Neely killing, I mean, what if the roles had been reversed? What if he, what if what's his name, the killer? I'm blanking on his name. Had been the one who was mentally ill, a white guy, mentally ill and acting belligerent, but not actually physically trying to hurt anybody. And Neely had been the person who choked him. I don't think there's any question that if a black guy had been the killer and a white guy his victim, that we'd see more serious charges here.
Yeah. The Rittenhouse is a great example. I wrote an article about Rittenhouse called The Kenosha Tinderbox a long, long time ago, while he was still being going through the trial, the Kenosha Tinderbox. Now, here's the thing with Rittenhouse. He actually didn't break the law. When you understand and I did look into this, I researched this, he didn't break the law. Even though the newspaper said he had, he didn't. He didn't break the law. What he did do was stupid, but that's not against the law. Being stupid is not a crime. He was very stupid to carry a gun. Now, what it did do, that case created a really interesting situation for the future. Anytime there is a riot or a protest and anyone goes there with a gun and kills someone, as long as that other person has a gun, you have the Rittenhouse defense. You cannot be convicted now because Rittenhouse is your precedent. Not president, precedent. Rittenhouse happened first. Now, anyone would be quoting that as a stated case to say, you can't convict my client because my client only did what Kyle Rittenhouse did. He went to protect property. He went to protect himself. He went to protect others. He saw someone with a gun. He felt threatened. He shot that person. So it's the survivor is going to get away with it if two people on opposing sides both have guns. That's the story of Kenosha now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think, from what I know of the case, that his life was threatened.
Well, it was. With Rittenhouse, his life was threatened. If you saw the video, there's no doubt he was on his back and a guy was walking towards him with a gun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he shot. Interestingly, the guy with the gun only got shot in the arm, but his arm just collapsed. You couldn't see it clearly, but certainly he won't be using that arm again for a long time.
But he also shot people who didn't have guns, and
but he was hit with a skateboard. When he went down, a guy came at him with a skateboard, and he shot that guy, killed him. And a guy was walking towards him with a gun, and he shot that guy and didn't kill him. But he got his defense. He was protecting property. He was protecting his life. Now, that doesn't mean I agree with it at all. I don't agree with this.
Yeah.
But that's the law in the place where he was, in Kenosha. That's the law there. I'm not even sure which state it was in, because it wasn't in Washington. I think it was the other side of the border. I'm not sure. Oregon, maybe?
Let's see. I believe he was from Illinois, and the incident took place in Kenosha.
Yeah,
Illinois is the state just to the south of Wisconsin. Kenosha's in Wisconsin.
Okay, there you go. So in the state where that happened, he hadn't broken the law. When I started looking at that case, I was, no, he's going to get away with this. It looks like he'll get away with this. And if he hadn't got away with it, if he'd been convicted, then you would have had civil war on your hands. I'm sure.
Oh, I don't know. No, but I think he would have been convicted if he had been black.
Yeah. So Ben, regardless of whether he was within his legal rights, I couldn't agree more with you. But under the terms of the law where he was, yeah, you and I both agree he was wrong. But under the terms of the law in the place where he was, he didn't break it. He was not in breach of the law. Now, what that means is they need to change that law. That would be how I would look at that. And whether they will or not, I don't know.
Yeah. Anonymous says, no evidence Rittenhouse was protecting property at the time. He was roaming the street holding a gun. Agree completely.
The question is, there's no evidence, but the jury believed he was. Yeah. It's not up to us to make that judgment. We didn't hear all the evidence. Unless you've read the transcript of the case, then we don't know what that evidence was. And that's the fact. The jury believed he was doing what he was legally entitled to do. And the jury believed that he was protecting property and protecting himself. Now, whether we agree with that as a law is neither here nor there. Personally, I would have locked him away forever. But you go to a protest carrying a gun, then there should be a law against that. But there's not.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, there wasn't any property under threat. I mean, there have certainly been cases like in Minneapolis where there were riots and property was damaged, but that wasn't happening in Kenosha, and it hasn't happened at the vast majority of the protests that have taken place around killings of black people.
The thing is, I mean, we don't know what was going on there because we haven't read the transcripts. But if the jury believed he was protecting property, the jury believed that he was legally entitled to carry that gun. The jury believed that he was defending himself against people who were either harming him or a threat to his life or a threat to someone else's life or a threat to property. The jury believed that. And without having the information to our hands, I would say that under the terms of the local law, that's true. Yeah. And this is also true from Anonymous. People saw him as a potential mass shooter. I would agree with that. People see him as a, yeah. I mean, he's the National Rifle Association.
He is a mass shooter. He traveled through state lines to protect what? He was there to murder black people. It didn't actually turn out that the people he killed were black, but yeah, I mean, he didn't have good intentions for being there. He may have thought he did.
We don't think he did, but the jury did. Now, it wasn't an all-white jury, but it was mostly white jury, I think. Yeah. And whatever we think, Ben, sorry, the jury found him not guilty. The law of the land where he was said he was not guilty, and that's the fact. It doesn't matter what we think of him personally. And I'm 100% in support of what you're saying. It looks like he went there with trouble in mind. I don't think he expected to kill anyone. He was, no 17-year-old goes out expecting that they're going to kill someone. I don't think we can say that. But for sure, he's not a nice guy. Not a nice guy at all. But then a lot of American people own guns, and they are nice guys, I think.
Yeah, sure. But at the same time, we have a problem like no other country in the world, at least countries that aren't in, complete chaos. We have mass shootings on a regular basis. No other country has that. And when you think about it, it's just such a weird thing. You go out and randomly shoot people you don't even know.
I know.
That reminds me of another mass shooting that took place. They got a lot of publicity here. The guy that shot up a mall in a suburb of Dallas, Texas.
A gun-free zone too.
Really? I didn't know that.
The mall that he went to was a gun-free zone. And can you believe this? The National Rifle Association said, after this happened, we need less gun-free zones. He would not have had the opportunity to kill as many as 8 people if it wasn't a gun-free zone. The only reason he got away with killing so many people was because it's gun-free and no one was there to carry to defend themselves, except an off-duty police officer who was allowed to carry his gun.
Yeah,
I know. So in order to prevent guns, we just need more guns.
Yeah. Well, the thing that was bizarre about this was everybody was like, whoa, but he's Hispanic. How can he be a mass killer? And, how could he be a, neo-Nazi? Allegedly he had, white supremacist views. They're like, but he's Hispanic. Well, hello. Spain is a white country. Spanish people colonized Latin America. The dude was, at most mixed race. And so
well, they made a big thing about a year ago, maybe towards the end of last year. There was a Taiwanese guy who shot up a church, a Chinese church. And they made a big thing about that because he was Chinese. Now, of course, this is a great thing that whenever America meets someone who is Chinese who does something wrong, it doesn't matter that they are from Taiwan or Hong Kong or wherever they're from. They could have been 3, 4, 5 generations. Now they are Chinese Americans. And the tainted brush there. Now, I honestly, I don't want to go too deep into this gun thing. I've carried firearms myself as a police officer. I am very anti-guns. And I hope people don't think I'm supporting Kyle Rittenhouse. I'm not at all. What the point was whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, no matter what his intentions were, under the law of the area where he was, he didn't break it. Now, it's
Well,
not
yes, he
Kyle
did, because
Rittenhouse's.
he was only 17, as someone pointed out in the comments.
No, that's not an offence. He was 17 and he crossed the state border, but he didn't carry his gun across the state border. His
Okay,
father
but he
dropped him
shouldn't
off.
have had the gun in the first place. You
Well,
can't carry a gun if you're 17.
yeah, you can. And in that state, he wasn't breaking that law.
Hmm.
That's the thing. He didn't break any carry laws. He didn't break cross state line laws. I looked into this, and I've established that he didn't,
Okay.
because his stepfather drove, or his stepmother, I can't remember which, drove him across the border. She or he was the carrier at that time.
Yeah.
So that was why he didn't get charged with carrying a gun across the state border at underage. But he was legally carrying a gun that he legally owned and was registered to him. Everything was right about it, but he shouldn't have carried it across state lines. You're right, but he didn't. Technically, we know he did, but his mother or father, stepfather, I can't remember which, drove him across the border with the gun in the car, and they were the carrier. So that's why he didn't get it. Yeah.
But just to follow up on what I was saying, I mean, in Latin America, you look at who the elites are, and most every country down there, they're lighter skinned people. There's definitely a lot of white supremacy in Latin America. So this idea that if an American who's of Hispanic descent, such a person can't be a white supremacist. Well, of course they are, because that's commonplace in Latin America. I mean, that, when the US-backed coup took place in Bolivia, the people who carried it out were right-wing white people.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's a big problem. Where do we go from here? We're going to start winding it up now. We've been an hour and a quarter, and I wanted to keep this under 90 minutes. I'm really exhausted. I left another city 1,500 kilometers away at 7 o'clock this morning, and I actually haven't had a meal today yet. I've been surviving. You'd approve of this. I was in Xi'an, which has a huge Muslim quarter, and I got some Xinjiang dates. And that's what I've been living on. This was a bag twice as big. That's my lunch today and my dinner today. So I'm going to try and get. It's now 10 to 11. I'm going to try and get something to eat, because tomorrow I have another long day. And when I finish work at 8 p.m., I'm going to the airport, which is 90 minutes drive from here. So tomorrow's going to be exactly the same. And then I get a weekend off before going to another 2 cities next week. 7 cities in 20 days. Pretty busy.
Wow. Oh, yes, you are.
Yeah. So did I hear Muslim? Yes, I was in the Muslim quarter of Xi'an, which is some say the beginning of the Silk Road, and some say the end of the Silk Road, but it's where the Silk Road either started or finishes. And I think you could say it's where the Silk Road finishes. It has a huge, massive mosque. Many Muslims there. I mean, we're talking tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of Muslims living in the area around this part of Xi'an. And it's the most incredible place. If anyone ever comes to China, you have to go there, because it's also the city where the terracotta warriors are. So it's really, really worthwhile going. And the Muslim quarter, the food there is amazing. Yeah, here it is, Hui Minjie. Yeah.
That reminds me, I think it was in Xi'an, I don't remember for sure, but part of the American anti-China propaganda lately has been that some other Muslim group in China was being repressed. They weren't allowed to speak their native language, quote unquote. Turns out that whatever the group was, and I don't remember, their native language is in fact Mandarin. So it was just this person didn't know what they were talking about.
Hui Muslims speak Mandarin. The word Hui.
Yeah, that's who it was. That's who it was.
Yeah, the Hui Muslims, and most of the people. I mean, there are some Uyghurs from Xinjiang. There's Kazakhs, there's Tajiks, there's Mongols. There's all kinds of Muslims inside of China. But when generations and generations ago, the Hui Muslims, the Muslims or the people who converted to Islam or married into Islam, they became an ethnic minority of their own. They are Hui Muslims. So we have in China 56 ethnicities. Hui is one of them. So and my wife and I have traveled extensively through Gansu and Ningxia. Ningxia is actually a Hui autonomous region, and until about 20 years ago was mired in poverty. When I saw it first time in 2014, it was very, very poor. We were back in 2019. It has a fantastic wine industry. I'm not kidding you. Some of the best wine you will ever taste, red wine, in your life comes from northern China, northwest China. Someone's just said this. There are many forms of Muslims inside of China. We hear about the Uyghurs or the Uyghurs, and we hear about them all the time because they're the ones being supposedly persecuted, which is not true. But also in that region, there are Kazakhs, Tajiks, Kyrgyz. Just a little north of them, there are the Mongols, and there are also Tibetan Muslims as well. There's Muslims all over China, and the Hui are the kind of Chinese Muslim, but the rest of them are all Turkic or Slavic. They've come from different areas and settled into this part of China. It's a really interesting place, and when you start to look into this, there are a lot of. I was really surprised when I first came to China. I had no idea of this. Massive numbers of Muslims in China, and some of my good friends are Muslims. I've got a really good friend who's Mongolian, and she's Muslim. One of my wife's best friends, she's a lovely lady, doesn't mind a glass of wine either. So they're not really strict in Islam, but she is a Muslim, and she recently started dating a guy who is also a Mongolian Muslim. Yeah, Ningxia is the wine center of China. There you go. I strongly recommend if you can.
I didn't know anything about. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, if you don't know anything about Chinese wine, only buy it if it says Ningxia on the bottle, because there are some shit Chinese red wines, I can tell you.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because the stereotype about the United States is that the good wine comes from California, but there's actually good wines from many places in the U.S. There's actually some wineries within about 10 miles of where I live that produce some excellent wine. So, and I live in Indiana, if anybody doesn't know.
There you go. Kyrgyz, Tajik, Shibay, yes, Shibay, and Uzbek. I didn't know the Uzbek. I've never heard of that one. But Uyghur, Kazakh, Hui, Mongolian, Kyrgyz, and Tajik, I do know. And yeah, I think we got them all there. There's a lot of Muslims, and someone said it's 21 to 28 million. There are more mosques per person per Muslim person in China than there are in the Middle East. That might tell you something. Yeah. And where we were in Xi'an, huge, biggest mosque I've ever seen. Yeah. Anyway, I think unless you have anything more to add, I think it might be time for us to say goodnight.
Yeah. We seem to, hit about an hour and 20 to an hour and 30 minutes almost every single time. So
I think it's a good time.
A pattern.
Yeah. So the bitter pill, lefty vegan. How do you spell that?
At LEFTYVEGAN. And please, especially since currently I've been prevented from uploading videos to YouTube, but in any case, please check out my Substack blog, which I put the video on that YouTube took down. My site is jeffmelton.substack.com.
jeffmelton.substack.com. jeffmelton.substack.com.
Yeah, and I may I should, in retrospect, I shouldn't have put anything about the vaccine issue on YouTube because they still seem very ridiculously censorious about that. And folks I know who were like, I'm just a psychologist. I read the literature about vaccines and COVID, and I'm pretty familiar with it, but I'm certainly no expert. But people I know, like Dan, who does the show Debunk the Funk on YouTube, and Susan, I forget her last name, who does a show called Back to the Science on YouTube. They've both had their videos taken down by YouTube, even though they are, absolutely very, they have a very deep understanding of the issue, and are, their shows are dedicated to debunking the anti-vaxxers. And they've had, because YouTube's out. I mean, when we've got, artificial intelligence like, Chat GPT that are very sophisticated, it's mind-boggling to me that YouTube has such an unsophisticated algorithm for moderating content, where they can't tell the difference between somebody expressing one point of view and somebody expressing the exact opposite point of view. It's just crazy.
Yeah. I think it's probably just expressing any point of view, and we'll take it off until we've established it's not bad. That's the way. But I think it's probably a good idea to steer away from that
YouTube
kind of commentary.
Content. Yeah,
it's great to have
it on my Substack to begin with.
Yeah, we always have 2020 retrospective vision, don't we?
Yeah.
All right, listen, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah.
We just didn't quite hit 100, but that's not bad. We've got 98 or 99 followers.
Yeah, we'll have 1,000 or two in no time.
Yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there.
Yeah.
And thanks for anyone who just tuned in just to see what we're chatting about. We will do this about once a month. It's running about every 5 weeks at the moment, isn't it? And that's my fault.
Yeah. I mean, that's fine. What you do while you can. But, again, everybody, please subscribe to my channel on YouTube, The Bitter Pill, and subscribe to The Bitter Pill blog on Substack, jeffmelton.substack.com. And like and share and read or watch content, because Jerry doesn't have a huge channel. I have a much, much smaller channel, so I could use all the help I can get.
Yeah, I'm getting bigger. I got 800 new followers 2 days ago. I put out a video about the Central Asian conference, and got 800 new followers in 24 hours.
That's awesome.
So all I can say now is thanks, everyone. Good night, and we shall see you again soon.
So long, everybody.
And it's time to say good night, everybody. Thank you.
Okay.
Now, this is where we